Every day, she cried quietly in the same bus seat, her small hands trembling as if carrying a secret too heavy to bear. When the driver finally looked beneath her seat, what he found shattered him and changed everything. Henry Collins adjusted his rearview mirror with a practiced motion as the school bus rumbled down the familiar streets of Brookdale. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall maple trees lining the road, casting streaks of gold across the worn, navy blue seats. At 68 years old, Henry had seen his fair share of kids come and go. Some loud, some quiet, some bursting with energy, others weighed down by burdens that no child should have to carry. He'd driven this route for nearly 8 years since retiring from his job at the city's water treatment plant. The bus had become his second life, a place where he watched seasons change not just outside the windows, but in the faces of the kids he safely delivered home each day. The usual noise filled the cabin. A pair of boys in the back argued about whose turn it was on a gaming app. A group of middle school girls giggled loudly over a viral video, their laughter spilling into every corner. Others sat quietly with earbuds in, heads bobbing to their own private soundtracks. It was the usual chaos, the kind Henry had grown used to, a strange kind of background music that defined his afternoons. But amid the familiar clamor, something was off. It started last Thursday. A girl he hadn't paid much attention to before had boarded the bus with her head down, hair falling in front of her face, her thin arms wrapped tightly around her chest like she was bracing against some invisible storm. She wasn't one of the regular chatterboxes, nor was she part of the usual clusters of kids. Quiet wasn't unusual. Some kids were just introverted, but something about her was different. Her name, if he recalled from the roster, was Emma Rodriguez. Maybe 15. A recent transfer. Henry hadn't thought much of her at first. New kids often took a while to warm up. But that day, as he glanced into the mirror during a routine stop, he noticed it, the unmistakable tremor in her shoulders. She was crying. Not loudly. Not in a way anyone else noticed. But quietly, desperately, like someone trying not to be heard. Her head tilted just enough that he could catch the faintest shimmer of tears sliding down her cheek before she hastily wiped them away with her sleeve. Henry frowned but said nothing. It wasn't his place. Kids cry. Middle school and high school were emotional minefields. Maybe it was a bad grade. Maybe an argument with a friend. Maybe the ordinary aches of growing up. But then it happened again the next day. And the day after. Each time she got on the bus, Emma would head for the same seat, fourth row from the front, window side, directly above one of the underseat air vents. She kept her head down, backpack clutched like a shield, and didn't say a word to anyone. The same pattern unfolded, quiet during the initial stretch of the route when the bus was full. Then, as kids filtered off at their stops and the bus grew emptier, the mask would start to crack. Her body curled in tighter. Her hands shook. And eventually, the silent sobs would come, shoulders trembling as she tried, and failed, to stifle them completely. By the fifth day, Henry could no longer dismiss it. This wasn't the transient misery of a tough math test or a broken friendship bracelet. This was something heavier. Something festering. Something that clung to her like a shadow no one else seemed to notice. At one stop, as the last group of boys filed off, he risked a glance back over his shoulder. Emma sat staring out the window, her reflection warped by the glass, eyes distant and hollow. Her knuckles were white from gripping the strap of her backpack, and her lower lip trembled as though she were holding back more than just tears, like she was holding back a scream. Henry's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Something was very, very wrong. The following Monday, as the afternoon bell rang and students poured out of the school doors like a tide of backpacks and sneakers, Henry leaned forward in his seat, watching for her. There she was, Emma Rodriguez, walking slowly, head down, her thin figure almost swallowed by the oversized gray hoodie she wore every day. Her hands were shoved deep into the front pocket, and the frayed ends of her sleeves nearly covered her fingers completely. She moved like a shadow, gliding along the edge of the crowd as if trying to make herself invisible. As she stepped onto the bus, she didn't glance at anyone. No nod, no small smile, not even the reflexive eye contact most kids offered when they passed Henry at the wheel. She walked straight to her usual seat, fourth row from the front, slid in by the window, and immediately curled into herself. Her backpack sat on her lap like a barrier between her and the rest of the world. Her head ducked, the brim of her hood casting her face into shadow. Henry watched her from the mirror for a long moment, wrestling with whether to say something. He wasn't the meddling type. Over the years, he'd learned that kids didn't always appreciate grown-ups prying into their lives. Sometimes a little space was the kindest thing you could give. But then again, space didn't seem to be helping Emma. He cleared his throat, tapping the switch to close the bus doors. "Afternoon, Emma," he said, keeping his voice gentle but clear. "How's it going?" No response. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. He waited a beat, then tried again. "Nice weather today, huh? Better than that rain we had last week." Still nothing. Her head remained bowed, her gaze fixed somewhere in her lap. Her posture was defensive, arms wrapped tight around her knees now, as if shrinking further into herself might make her disappear entirely. Henry sighed quietly and shifted the bus into gear, pulling away from the curb. He'd tried. He wasn't about to push her. As the bus wound its way through the neighborhood, the usual chaos unfolded behind him. The Jones twins argued over whose turn it was to play on the shared tablet. A group of 8th grade girls laughed hysterically about something on TikTok. Somewhere in the back, a kid beatboxed badly while his friends egged him on. But Emma remained utterly detached from it all. Not once did a single kid glance her way. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody teased her. Nobody even whispered behind her back. It wasn't avoidance born from cruelty. It was like she didn't exist to them at all. Henry found himself frowning. In his years driving this route, he'd seen kids ostracized before. Cliques formed easily. But there was usually at least some chatter, a side-eye glance, a snicker, an under-the-breath comment. With Emma, there was nothing. Just this eerie absence. As though the whole bus had unconsciously agreed to pretend she wasn't there. At one point, during a long red light, Henry tried again. "You settling in okay, Emma?" he asked, eyes flicking between the road and the mirror. "It's tough being the new kid sometimes. I remember when my family moved when I was about your age. Took me weeks to make my first friend." Her hands tightened around the backpack, her fingers knotting in the fabric. For a brief moment, Henry thought she might say something. Her head lifted, barely, and he caught the flash of her dark eyes under the hood. Wide, glossy, afraid. Then her head snapped back down, and her body folded tighter. Silence. Henry let out a slow breath, biting back the urge to say more. It was like trying to talk to a locked door. But it wasn't just defiance. It wasn't teenage attitude. It was something else, something hollow. Defensive. Wounded. As stop after stop emptied the bus, Emma never moved, never looked up, never interacted with anyone. And not one student said goodbye to her. Not one even glanced her way as they passed her row. She sat alone, isolated not by choice but by circumstance, her silence as heavy as a cinder block sitting square on Henry's chest. By the time he pulled the bus toward her stop, that familiar gnawing worry had returned. This wasn't a kid who was shy. This wasn't a kid who just hadn't made friends yet. This was a kid drowning. It was Thursday when Henry noticed something that made his stomach tighten in a way it hadn't before. The day had been unremarkable in every other sense. The same rowdy arguments from the back seats, the same loud laughter, the same tedious traffic along Oak Ridge Avenue. But woven into the routine was Emma, as always, a quiet shadow folded into the fourth-row window seat, her hoodie pulled so far forward it almost obscured her face entirely. By now, Henry had grown used to her silence. It still gnawed at him, the way she seemed to shrink into herself, how her presence was like a ghost haunting the edges of the bus. But today there was something else. It started at the corner of Maple and Sycamore, a narrow intersection where the road narrowed due to an old construction project nobody had bothered to finish. Henry knew the turn well. He slowed the bus every time he approached it to avoid scraping the curb. That's when he caught it. Movement. In the mirror, just as he eased into the turn, he saw Emma lean forward suddenly, her upper body folding down until her head was nearly level with her knees. Her arm disappeared under the bench seat in front of her. It wasn't casual, like dropping a pencil or grabbing a fallen water bottle. No, it was deliberate, calculated. She glanced sideways first, as though checking to make sure no one was watching, then reached down quickly. A sharp metallic clink echoed softly in the mostly empty bus. It was subtle, the kind of sound anyone else might have missed under the hum of the engine. But Henry's ears were well trained to pick out things that didn't belong, like the snap of a loose belt or the rattle of a cracked taillight. This wasn't mechanical. It was something else. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and he forced himself to look back at the road, navigating the tight turn. When he flicked his eyes back to the mirror, Emma had straightened, her arms folded again around her backpack, head tilted down, breathing shallow but rapid, like someone who just sprinted up a flight of stairs. Henry frowned. Something about the motion felt too rehearsed, too practiced. This wasn't the first time she'd done it. He was sure of that now. He replayed the image in his mind. The way her hand slid under the seat. The way she froze for just a second after the metallic sound, as though waiting to make sure no one had noticed. What was under there? As the route continued, Henry kept glancing at her when he could, discreet but watchful. And sure enough, it happened again. Different street this time, Elm and Jefferson. Another slow corner. Another quick lean forward. Another subtle adjustment of something. Again, that faint metallic clink. A knot began tightening in Henry's chest. He told himself it could be anything. A kid keeping a stash of gum. Maybe some sentimental trinket. Something innocent. But that didn't match her posture. The way her fingers trembled afterward, the way she kept glancing toward the front of the bus as if bracing for someone to call her out. He waited until the stop before hers when the second-to-last student stepped off, leaving the bus mostly empty. As he pulled back onto the road, he cleared his throat and glanced back. "Emma," he asked, keeping his tone light, almost casual. "Everything all right back there?" Her head jerked up like she'd been yanked by a string. Her eyes were wide, startled, caught in something. "Yeah," she mumbled quickly, too quickly. "Just dropped something. My, hair clip." Henry nodded slowly, pretending to buy it, but his heart pounded a little faster. He'd driven this bus long enough to know when a kid was lying. He could always hear it, the catch in their voice, the tension in their shoulders. This wasn't just a dropped hair clip. As Emma's stop approached, she slung her backpack over one shoulder without meeting his eyes. Her feet shuffled, hesitant. She paused at the front of the bus, hands tight on the straps. "Thanks," she murmured without conviction before stepping off. Henry watched her walk up the cracked sidewalk toward the small, tired-looking white house with its peeling paint and sagging porch. She disappeared inside without looking back. He sat there for a long moment, engine idling, eyes flicking toward the row where she always sat. Something was hidden under that seat. Something she didn't want anyone to find. And tomorrow, Henry decided, he was going to find out what it was. The bus rumbled down the last stretch of its route, the sunlight now lower in the sky, casting long, fractured beams across the emptying rows of seats. Henry glanced in the mirror, watching the last pair of boys tumble out at their stop, laughing and shoving each other, completely unaware of anything beyond their own small world. The bus doors hissed shut behind them, and for the first time since the school bell rang that afternoon, silence settled over the vehicle. Only one passenger remained, Emma. She sat rigid in her usual spot, fourth row, head pressed against the window, watching the world slip by as though it didn't belong to her. Her fingers curled tightly around the frayed strap of her backpack, nails chewed down to nothing. Her shoulders hunched forward, tense, braced as if waiting for an invisible blow. Henry swallowed, gripping the wheel tighter as his thoughts turned over like restless gears. He'd spent the last 2 days trying to convince himself it was none of his business. She was quiet, sure, withdrawn, yes, but some kids were. Not everyone bounced onto the bus, eager to chatter. Not every child wanted to be seen. But this, what he'd seen today, the deliberate way she reached under that seat, the way her entire body recoiled when he asked if she was okay, it didn't sit right. Her stop was coming up. The little white house with the sagging roof and the rusted mailbox that leaned like it was trying to escape. No cars in the driveway. No toys in the yard. Just silence wrapped around the place like an old, heavy blanket. As he pulled to the curb, Henry shifted the bus into park and reached for the lever to open the doors. They folded open with a pneumatic sigh. Emma rose stiffly, backpack clutched tight to her chest, and shuffled toward the front. She didn't make eye contact. Didn't say a word. Just stepped off the bus like someone walking into a sentence they didn't want to finish. "See you tomorrow, Emma," Henry said, but his voice felt thin, barely reaching her. She didn't answer. He watched her walk the narrow, cracked path to her front door. Her small figure disappeared inside without a glance back, the door closing with a soft, final click. For a long moment, Henry sat there. His hands stayed on the wheel, but his eyes were fixed on the row where she'd been sitting. His gut twisted in a way he knew better than to ignore. A long career in a blue-collar job had taught him to trust that feeling, the one that flared up when something was off, when a sound wasn't right, when a machine was seconds away from breaking. He'd saved his skin more than once trusting it, and it was screaming at him now. His eyes darted to the empty street. Quiet. No one watching. Just take a look, he muttered under his breath. Just check. Better to know. Henry stood, the old joints in his knees crackling in protest as he made his way down the aisle. The floor vibrated softly under his boots, the engine idling in neutral. When he reached the fourth row, he paused, glancing toward the door again. Still no one. His heart thudded louder than it should have. He crouched low, hands bracing against the worn vinyl seat as he ducked his head to peer beneath. At first, there was nothing, just the usual scattering of dust, a discarded pencil, and a scrap of paper. But then his fingers brushed something hard, something deliberately wedged between the floor and the metal frame of the air vent. He pulled it out slowly. A small, battered tin box, the kind that once might have held breath mints or sewing needles, now wrapped tightly with black electrical tape. His pulse hammered as he peeled the tape back with shaking fingers. The lid creaked open. Inside was a folded slip of paper stained at the edges, a faded Polaroid photograph, and a small, square device with a blinking red light, a GPS tracker. Henry's throat closed. His hands trembled as he unfolded the note. "If someone finds this, please help me. He said he's watching me. Everywhere. I don't know what to do anymore." Henry staggered backward, sitting down heavily in the seat behind him. His mouth went dry. The photo shook in his hand. It was of Emma, maybe younger, smiling weakly beside a man whose arm was looped tightly around her shoulder, his smile forced, his eyes cold. A cold, creeping dread spread through Henry's chest. This wasn't nothing. This wasn't a quiet kid having a hard time at school. This was a desperate cry for help. And someone was watching her. Henry's fingers trembled as he turned the small tin box over in his hands. The surface was rusted along the edges, the metal worn thin in spots where time had gnawed at it. A strip of black electrical tape wrapped around it haphazardly, not neat like someone trying to preserve something valuable, but desperate, as if whoever sealed it had done so quickly, hands shaking, breath caught in their throat. His thumb traced the faint outline of something etched into the lid. Letters, faint, barely legible, scratched crudely by something sharp. Help. Just that. No name. No explanation. Just 4 desperate letters etched deep enough to leave scars in the metal. His pulse hammered in his ears, his throat dry. Every part of his brain screamed to leave it alone. To close the box, put it back, pretend he hadn't seen it. But his hands moved anyway, peeling the tape away bit by bit, his breath catching every time the adhesive gave with a reluctant tear. When the last strip came free, he gently pried open the lid. The metal protested with a brittle squeal, the hinges nearly frozen shut from rust and grime. And then it opened, and what he saw made the world tilt sideways for a moment. Folded carefully on top was a slip of lined notebook paper, yellowed at the corners, the creases worn nearly to tearing. Under that, 3 small photographs, edges curled, colors faded but still clear enough to make out what was in them. Beneath the photos sat something that didn't belong in a child's possession. A small square device, matte black, with a single blinking red light. Henry didn't need to be an expert to know what it was. A GPS tracker. His hands tightened around the box, breath coming shallow. He carefully unfolded the note first, the paper crackling under his fingers. The handwriting was small, slanted, rushed, the kind of penmanship that comes from someone scared half to death. "If someone finds this, please help me. He knows where I am. He said he's watching me all the time. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to trust. I'm so scared. Please. Please." Henry swallowed hard. The words blurred as his eyes stung, either from the rising burn of panic or the sharp scent of the old paper and metal. Maybe both. His fingers reached for the photographs next. The first showed Emma, younger, maybe 9 or 10, smiling uneasily at the camera. Her hair was shorter then, tucked behind her ears. Beside her stood a man, tall, gaunt, with sharp cheekbones and deep-set eyes that seemed to pierce through the photo itself. His arm was thrown casually around Emma's shoulders, but something about the grip looked wrong, possessive, firm, as though it wasn't meant to comfort but to restrain. The second photo made Henry's stomach not even tighter. It was of a basement. Dim, poorly lit, concrete floors. In the corner was a thin mattress with crumpled blankets, a plastic bucket nearby, and nothing else. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, cruel shadows against the walls. The third photo was darker still. It showed the same man standing outside what looked like Emma's house, holding what Henry recognized as a remote, possibly for the GPS tracker, smirking directly into the lens like he knew whoever would find this would never dare stop him. Henry forced his gaze back to the blinking device. His fingers hovered above it, afraid to even touch it. The red light blinked steadily, rhythmically. Not random. A signal. A constant reminder that someone, somewhere, was watching. Panic tangled in his chest. His mind raced. Who would do this to a child? Why was she hiding this here, on the bus of all places? The only answer that made sense chilled him to his bones. She believed the bus was the only place where whoever he was couldn't search easily. A moving shelter for a few precious hours a day. Henry snapped the box shut, gripping it tight like it might explode. He ran a shaking hand through his hair, eyes darting back toward the empty front of the bus. The weight of what he was holding suddenly felt unbearable, as if it had doubled in mass the moment he understood what it meant. This wasn't something he could walk away from. This wasn't some teenager sneaking cigarettes or hiding notes about a crush. This was a cry for help. A real one. And someone dangerous, someone twisted, was watching Emma Rodriguez. And maybe watching him now too. Henry sat frozen in the fourth-row seat, the tin box trembling slightly in his weathered hands. His eyes stared down at the folded slip of paper, his fingers hesitant, afraid of what truth might be scrawled inside. The engine rumbled quietly beneath him, the familiar hum of the bus that had always felt so mundane, so routine, now sounding like the loudest thing in the world, drowning out every other thought except the thundering of his own heartbeat. Slowly, carefully, he unfolded the paper. The creases were deep, almost brittle, like it had been folded and unfolded too many times, perhaps by trembling fingers. The ink had smudged in places, as though tears had fallen on it, or maybe the person writing had been shaking so badly the pen dragged unevenly across the page. His eyes scanned the words, written in small, cramped letters that slanted slightly to the right. If you're reading this, please help me. I don't know how much longer I can do this. He said he's watching me everywhere I go. I don't feel safe anywhere. I tried hiding before, but he always finds me. I don't know what to do. I don't know if anyone would believe me. Please, please help me. Henry felt the words like a punch to the chest. His throat tightened, his vision blurred for a second, and he blinked hard, forcing it away. His hands trembled, fingers tightening on the fragile piece of paper like it was the only thing tethering him to the moment. The desperation in the words wasn't subtle. It bled off the page, raw and aching. This wasn't some teenage exaggeration, not an overreaction to a fight at home or a falling out with a friend. This was terror. Real terror. The kind that makes a child scribble a message to a stranger and stuff it in a tin box, hiding it under a bus seat because they truly believe it's their only lifeline. His gaze flicked down to the next line, hastily scrawled at the very bottom in a smaller, more frantic script. If he finds this, I'm dead. A chill swept down Henry's spine, crawling over his skin like ice. His hands gripped the box tighter, feeling the edges bite into his palms. Who was he? The man in the photograph? Emma's guardian? Someone worse? Henry squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, fighting against the tidal wave of horror rising in his chest. He opened them slowly, forcing himself to breathe, forcing his mind to work through the shock. All the pieces that had been gnawing at his gut these past few days snapped into a horrific shape. Emma's constant crying. Her withdrawn posture. The way her eyes darted around like prey watching for a predator. The way she avoided speaking, avoided connecting, as though even opening her mouth could invite danger. It all made sense now. She was scared, terrified, because someone had her under surveillance. Because someone had made her believe that she was utterly, completely trapped. And judging by the GPS tracker blinking steadily in the box, it wasn't just a threat, it was real. Someone was tracking her every movement. Someone wanted her to know that she couldn't hide. Henry's fingers clenched around the note, the fragile paper crinkling softly. His stomach churned, a sick, heavy dread spreading through him. He'd seen a lot in his life. 40 years working a rough job at the water plant, dealing with broken pipes, flooded basements, emergency call-outs in the dead of winter, but nothing like this. Nothing that made him feel this helpless. No, not helpless. Not yet. He folded the note carefully, almost reverently, as though damaging it would somehow damage the girl who'd written it. He slid it back into the tin box alongside the photographs and the tracker, snapping the lid shut. His mind raced. Call the school. The police. Would they even believe a bus driver finding a rusty box under a seat? But the fear that lived between the lines of that note, it was real. He could feel it. He could hear it in the way Emma never spoke, see it in how her shoulders never seemed to fully relax. Henry gritted his teeth, staring down at the box like it was a live grenade. One thing was certain, he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen it. Whatever was happening to Emma Rodriguez, it was bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The bus was still idling at the curb, but Henry barely heard the hum of the engine anymore. His world had narrowed down to the weight of the small tin box resting on his knees, the folded note trembling slightly in his hands, and the cold, rhythmic blink of the GPS tracker nestled inside. The red light pulsed steadily, not hurried, not frantic, just steady. Watching. Always watching. His eyes flicked between the note and the device, his pulse quickening with every passing second. This wasn't just a frightened kid hiding away from mean classmates. This wasn't schoolyard teasing or the heartbreak of a fractured friendship. No. His gut told him, no, it screamed at him, that this was something far darker. Something far more dangerous. Henry had spent his life trusting his instincts. Whether it was detecting the faint rattle of a faulty bearing at the water plant or sensing when a drunk driver was edging too close on the highway, his gut had never steered him wrong. And right now, that same instinct told him that Emma wasn't just scared, she was in serious danger. The blinking tracker confirmed it. Someone was monitoring her. Not figuratively. Not emotionally. Literally. Watching her every movement. Tracking where she went. Possibly listening. Possibly waiting. A sick realization twisted in his stomach. Emma's choice to hide the tracker on the bus wasn't random. It was deliberate. She thought this was the one place the person wouldn't look. A moving, temporary refuge. A place where, for an hour each day, the signal might seem off. Or at least give her a sliver of freedom. He could picture it now, her sitting there, knees pulled tight to her chest, constantly glancing down toward the floor vent, terrified that someone might hear the faint beep or see the blinking light. The thought made his throat constrict. What kind of monster does this to a child? His gaze shifted toward the window, staring down the street toward her house. It looked so normal. Faded white paint, sagging gutters, a cracked walkway littered with a few dry leaves. But how deceptive appearances could be. How easily evil disguised itself as ordinary. Henry forced himself to think. Think clearly. What did this mean? Whoever was behind this wasn't just threatening Emma. They had the tools, the mindset, and the cruelty to actively control her life. A GPS tracker wasn't some casual intimidation tactic. This was sophisticated. Planned. Intentional. It meant possession. It meant dominance. And it meant that whoever he was wanted Emma to know there was nowhere she could hide. The words from the note echoed in his mind. He's watching me everywhere I go. Everywhere. Henry's hands shook. He wiped his palms on his pant legs, but it didn't help. The sweat just kept coming, cold and sticky. His mind raced through possibilities. Should he go straight to the police? Would they believe him? A bus driver showing up with a rusted tin box and a note scribbled by a terrified girl? Or would they write it off as a misunderstanding, maybe an overreaction? Worse, what if the person watching Emma was already a step ahead? What if he was someone people trusted? The thought made Henry's skin crawl. And then another thought hit him, sharp, sudden, undeniable. If this person was tracking Emma, was he also tracking the tracker? Did hiding it under the bus seat make the signal stand out? Would this man, whoever he was, notice that the device hadn't moved from the bus for hours? Would he come looking? Henry's eyes snapped to the rearview mirrors, scanning the quiet street, half expecting a black car to turn the corner, a shadowy figure to step out, searching. But the road remained still. Empty. For now. But how long? The unease settled deep into his bones. This wasn't something he could just leave until tomorrow. Emma didn't have the luxury of tomorrow if someone was hunting her today. He closed the box carefully but kept it in his lap, like releasing it back under the seat would be a betrayal. No. He couldn't ignore this. He couldn't pretend this was someone else's problem. Not anymore. Emma had written that note for someone, anyone, to find. Today, that person was him. And whether he was ready or not, Henry Collins knew he was stepping into something far more dangerous than anything he'd ever faced before. Henry sat in his old pickup truck parked across the street from Emma's house, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. He told himself this was probably a bad idea, that maybe this was crossing a line, but the thought of driving away, of pretending none of this existed, made him feel worse. He glanced down at the tin box resting on the passenger seat, its battered metal lid reflecting the late afternoon sun. The note inside burned in his mind like an ember that wouldn't go out. His eyes scanned the house again. He hadn't noticed it before, but now, sitting still and really looking, details stood out like flashing warning signs. The windows, all of them, were covered, not with curtains but with thick, plywood boards screwed in from the inside. Not one, not two, all of them. The kind of boarding people used to stormproof a house before a hurricane, except there was no storm coming. The front porch sagged slightly at the left corner, the railing splintered and missing 2 spindles. The yard was overgrown, patches of brittle grass and weeds creeping up toward the foundation. No bikes, no toys, no sign that a child lived here. It was a house that didn't invite visitors. It repelled them. Henry exhaled slowly, unbuckling his seatbelt. "All right," he muttered to himself. "Just ask. Keep it simple." Grabbing the tin box and slipping it under his jacket, he stepped out, his boots crunching against the cracked sidewalk. Every step toward the front door felt heavier than the last, like wading through mud. When he reached the porch, he noticed deep scratches along the wood near the doorframe. Claw marks. No, fingernail marks. He swallowed hard, his gut tightening like a vice. He raised a hand and knocked. Not hard. Not aggressive. Firm. He waited. Nothing. He knocked again, louder this time, glancing over his shoulder. The street was still empty, eerily so. No passing cars. No neighbors tending lawns. Just silence thick enough to choke on. A shuffle inside. Then a deadbolt sliding open. The door creaked as it swung a few inches, revealing a sliver of a man behind it. Thin. Wiry. His face was gaunt, skin pulled tight over sharp cheekbones. Greasy black hair hung limp against his temples. His eyes were what hit Henry the hardest. Sharp, darting, like a cornered animal, but something else too. Something calculating. Evasive. Dangerous. "Yeah?" the man asked, his voice tight, impatient, like someone being interrupted in the middle of something they didn't want anyone to know about. Henry straightened. Afternoon. Name's Henry Collins. I'm the bus driver for Route 7. Emma rides with me." The man's lips twitched into something resembling a smile, but didn't quite make it. "Emma's uncle. Victor," he replied quickly, almost rehearsed. "What do you need?" Henry fought to keep his face neutral, masking the unease crawling up his spine. "Just doing my rounds. Checking in." Emma seemed a little upset lately. Quiet. Wanted to make sure everything's okay at home. Victor's gaze sharpened. He stepped out a little further, but kept the door half blocking his body. "Yeah, well, kids go through things. She's fine. Just adjusting." "Right," Henry replied, his tone even. "She hasn't said much. Not much of a talker. Always been that way." Victor's foot shifted behind the door like he was preparing to close it. "Nothing you need to worry about." Henry's eyes drifted past Victor, trying to glimpse inside, but the house was dark, too dark. Not a single light on. Even midday sunlight didn't seem to reach through the open door. Just shadows, thick and unnatural. Henry cleared his throat. She mentioned her parents aren't around. Victor stiffened, jaw tightening. Yeah. Her folks. Don't ask about them. Family stuff. I take care of her now. Something about the way he said it, the clipped tone, the subtle threat buried beneath the words, sent a chill skittering across Henry's skin. Victor's eyes narrowed. Look, I got things to do. Emma's fine. You done here? Henry hesitated. His instincts screamed that every word out of Victor's mouth was a lie. But without proof, without something concrete, he couldn't push further without blowing the whole thing. He forced a polite nod. Yeah, sure. Just wanted to check. Victor nodded back, but the movement was stiff, wary. Appreciate it. Have a good day now. The door started closing, but before it shut fully, Henry caught a glimpse, just a flicker, of movement deeper in the house. A small shadow ducking quickly behind a hallway wall. Small. Quick. Like someone hiding. Then the door shut with a dull, final click, followed by the scrape of the deadbolt sliding back into place. Henry stood there for a long second, staring at the wood grain of the door, his jaw clenched tight. Every hair on his arms stood on end. This wasn't a home. It was a cage. A trap. A place where something was very, very wrong. And Emma was still inside. Victor stood in the doorway, his thin frame blocking most of the entrance like a human barricade. His fingers tapped anxiously against the doorframe, a restless motion that didn't match the calm, dismissive words coming from his mouth. His eyes darted left and right, scanning the street behind Henry as if checking to see if anyone else was watching, listening. She's just going through a phase, Victor said with a short, humorless chuckle. Teenagers, you know how it is. Moody. Difficult. Her parents' passing hit her harder than anyone expected. Henry blinked, his jaw tightening. Her parents passed? He echoed, pretending like it was news, though every fiber of him knew Victor wanted that reaction, wanted him to accept the explanation and move on. Victor nodded, leaning casually against the doorframe as if that made the lie sound more reasonable. Yeah. Real tragic. A car accident last year. Emma's still adjusting. Ain't easy for a kid, losing both parents like that. But we manage. She's got me. Henry's eyes flicked past Victor, scanning the gloom inside the house again. A sliver of movement caught his attention, a soft shift of shadow at the far end of the narrow hallway. His breath hitched when he saw her. Emma, standing half-hidden behind the corner where the hall bent, only one side of her face visible. Her wide, frightened eyes locked onto his. Her lower lip trembled as though she was physically biting back the words that wanted to escape her mouth. Her gaze wasn't the look of someone merely grieving. It wasn't sadness. It was raw fear. A silent, pleading kind of fear. The kind that tightened her shoulders, pressed her flat against the wall like she could disappear into it. Her hands were clutched together near her chest, knuckles pale. Henry felt something deep in his chest twist painfully. His instincts screamed louder now. Her eyes weren't just wide, they were begging. Victor noticed where Henry was looking and shifted subtly to block the view, stepping fully into the doorway. His tone sharpened, the fake friendliness cracking just slightly. Like I said, she's dealing with a lot. But she's fine. Really. She don't like strangers poking around asking questions. I'm not a stranger. I drive her to school every day, Henry said, keeping his voice calm but edged with steel now. She's been crying on my bus, every single day. You think that's just a phase? Victor's mouth twitched, one corner lifting into something that was too thin to be a smile and too sharp to be anything friendly. Kids cry. That's what they do. Look, I appreciate you checking in or whatever, but it's not really your business. I got this handled. Henry forced his expression neutral, even though his fists clenched involuntarily. He wanted to shout, to push past Victor, to grab Emma and pull her out of that dark, suffocating house. But one wrong move, one step too aggressive, and Victor would slam the door shut, and Henry would have no way back in. No way to help. You're right, Henry said slowly, each word carefully chosen. It's just, well, she's been real quiet. Just wanted to make sure she was okay. Lot of folks say it takes a village, you know. Victor snorted. Yeah, well, this village don't need any mayors. We're fine. She's fine. But Henry's eyes shifted back toward the hallway. For just a fraction of a second, Emma peeked out again. Their eyes met. She didn't speak. Her lips parted, trembled, but no sound came out. It was like watching someone scream underwater. Desperate, silent, suffocating. Then, faster than before, she pulled back. Gone. Victor's voice hardened. Anything else? Henry shook his head slowly, swallowing the bitter anger rising in his throat. No, he said quietly. Nothing else. Have a good day. The door shut. Not slammed, just clicked closed. Controlled. Final. Henry stood there on the cracked front step, staring at the chipped white paint of the door, a deep, aching weight sinking into his gut. He had more questions than answers now. And worse, every answer Victor had given him was a lie. A bad one. But the kind of lie people told when they were hiding something unforgivable. Henry gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary as he pulled into the school parking lot. The late afternoon sun was beginning to fade behind the trees, casting long shadows across the brick walls of Brookdale Intermediate. His mind raced, looping the image of Emma's wide, trembling eyes over and over, paired with Victor's sharp, guarded tone that was still ringing in his ears. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And every instinct Henry had was now screaming louder than ever. He turned the key and killed the engine, sitting for a moment in the heavy silence that followed. He'd always told himself that driving the bus was just a job, get the kids to school, get them home safe. But this wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about that girl. Emma. That house. That look in her eyes. Pushing the door open, he stepped out and headed for the side entrance, the one closest to the administrative offices. His boots echoed in the empty hallway as he walked, the usual chatter of students now long gone, replaced by the muffled hum of the janitor's radio somewhere in the distance. The small plaque beside the frosted glass door read, Counseling Office, Mrs. Leary. He knocked gently but firmly. A moment later, the door opened, and Mrs. Leary appeared. She was in her late 40s, her short auburn hair tucked behind her ears, glasses slipping slightly down the bridge of her nose. Her face, usually kind and open, immediately registered confusion as she spotted him. Mr. Collins, she greeted, a polite smile forming. Is everything all right? Henry nodded stiffly but didn't bother with pleasantries. I was hoping you could help me with something. It's about one of my students on the bus. Emma Rodriguez. At the mention of Emma's name, Mrs. Leary's expression shifted subtly, surprise, perhaps a flicker of recognition, but also hesitation. Of course. Come in. He stepped inside the small office, cluttered with motivational posters, stacks of files, and a few framed photos of her with past graduating classes. She motioned for him to sit, pulling her chair closer to her desk. What's going on? Henry leaned forward, his hands folded tightly. I'm concerned. Emma's been crying on the bus. Every day. Won't speak to me. I tried stopping by her house this afternoon. Something about it, about her guardian, didn't sit right. I need to know more. Who's looking after her? Who can I talk to about this? Mrs. Leary's fingers hovered over her keyboard, her brows pulling together. You're not the first person who's noticed something, she admitted quietly. I've tried looking into her situation myself. She tapped a few keys, eyes scanning the screen. Her frown deepened. This isn't right. Henry leaned in. What isn't? She barely has any information in her file, she murmured, scrolling faster now. No medical records. No transcripts from her previous school. Just a line that says, transferred, but no details. Her emergency contacts. There's only one listed. A Victor. No phone number. No email. Just an address. Henry stiffened. The same house I was just at. Mrs. Leary sighed, visibly frustrated. When Emma enrolled, her guardian provided minimal paperwork. Said her parents passed away suddenly. He claimed there were legal issues with accessing some of her files. I flagged it for the administration, but nothing ever came of it. No other relatives? Henry asked. None listed, Mrs. Leary confirmed, her tone darkening. No grandparents. No aunts or uncles. No previous addresses. It's like someone scrubbed her records clean. Henry ran a hand over his face. That's not normal. No, she agreed. It's not. I've been in this job for over 15 years. Even kids who've bounced from school to school have something: report cards, immunization forms, disciplinary notes. Emma's file. It's like someone deliberately stripped it down to nothing but the bare minimum. A heavy silence settled between them, both understanding the weight of what that meant. Henry finally broke it. If something happens to her, if she disappears, nobody would even know where to look. Mrs. Leary's face paled slightly, and her fingers tightened around the mouse. I hate to admit it, but you might be right. Henry's jaw clenched. Then we need to do something. Fast. Mrs. Leary leaned back in her chair, her fingers absently twisting the chain of the silver pendant around her neck. Her lips pressed into a thin, uneasy line, as if the words she was about to say had been sitting heavy on her chest for far too long. You're not the first person to bring up concerns about Emma, she finally said, her voice dropping lower, as though the walls themselves might be listening. I've tried. I really have. Henry sat stiffly on the edge of his chair, watching her, waiting. He could hear the strain in her words, the frustration of someone who had been screaming into the void for too long and getting nothing but silence in return. Mrs. Leary sighed deeply, reaching toward a drawer and pulling out a slim manila folder, the same one she'd been looking at moments ago. She flipped it open, even though they both already knew how thin it was. When Emma transferred here, I did what I always do with new students. Sat her down, did an intake meeting, tried to make her feel comfortable. But it was different with her. She traced her finger down the inside of the folder, pausing at a section that was almost entirely blank. She wouldn't answer basic questions. Wouldn't make eye contact. I'm used to shy kids. Traumatized kids. It's part of this job. But Emma, she shook her head. It wasn't normal. She was afraid. All the time. Henry's jaw tightened. Did you tell anyone? Of course I did, she answered quickly, the frustration creeping back into her voice. I submitted a formal wellness concern to the vice principal within her first week here. I asked them to conduct a home visit. I flagged her file. But the response I got, she exhaled, her hands balling into fists. I was told to focus on students with real problems. Henry's eyebrows shot up. Real problems, he echoed, stunned. That's exactly what they said, she confirmed bitterly. When I pushed back, the admin told me her guardian, Victor, was fully cooperating. They said he'd submitted the minimum paperwork required. No red flags. They told me her behavior was typical of kids dealing with grief, that she just needed time to adjust. Henry scoffed under his breath, the anger bubbling just beneath his skin. Did no one bother to actually check that out? Look at that house. Talk to her. Anything. I tried, Mrs. Leary said, her voice cracking slightly. I asked for a second wellness check. Denied. I asked if we could at least get a school resource officer involved. They told me the caseload was too high and that there were other students with more pressing issues. She emphasized the last three words with air quotes, bitter and sharp. A heavy silence followed, so thick it felt suffocating. Henry finally broke it, voice rough. So they just ignored it. Mrs. Leary nodded stiffly. Yes, they ignored it. Or maybe they didn't want the hassle. A quiet kid who doesn't cause trouble, doesn't act out, doesn't make noise. She's easy to forget. Easy to shove to the back of the file cabinet. Henry stared at her, barely able to process how deep this negligence went. I don't get it. Aren't there protocols? Mandatory reporting. There are. On paper, she muttered. But when there's no bruises, no outward signs of abuse, and a guardian who smiles just enough to look convincing, things fall through the cracks. Henry leaned back, his heart thudding so hard it felt like it was shaking his ribs. Emma hadn't fallen through a crack. She'd been shoved into one. Hidden. Buried. Mrs. Leary closed the folder slowly, almost like she couldn't stand to look at it anymore. I've been carrying this knot in my stomach for weeks, Mr. Collins. Watching her walk these halls every day like a ghost. Knowing something's wrong. And every time I tried to make someone listen, they didn't. Henry stared out the narrow window beside her desk, watching the sunset dip below the trees. His hands clenched into fists in his lap. "Well," he said quietly, voice filled with a resolve that surprised even himself. "I'm listening now." The next day arrived with a heaviness Henry hadn't felt in years. His morning coffee tasted bitter, his hands shook more than usual as he tied his boots, and when he climbed into the bus, his familiar seat felt foreign beneath him. Everything that was once routine now carried a sharp, gnawing edge. Every creak of the brakes, every groan of the suspension sounded like a warning. When the final bell rang and the usual flood of students filled the bus, Henry kept his eyes on the mirror more than he ever had before. The laughter, the bickering, the hum of teenage voices faded into background noise. All he really saw was her. Emma climbed aboard like always, hood up, eyes fixed on the floor, backpack clutched to her chest. Not a word spoken. Not a glance spared for anyone. She moved straight to her usual spot, fourth row by the window, and folded into it like someone folding paper, tight, small, invisible. Henry tried to act natural. Pretend he wasn't watching. Pretend his hands weren't gripping the wheel just a little tighter as they rolled along the route. But he noticed something different today. Her posture was more rigid. Her hands trembled as they gripped the straps of her bag. Her gaze flicked to the floor more often, especially toward the space under the seat in front of her. The same spot where Henry had found the tin box just the day before. It was subtle. Maybe anyone else wouldn't have noticed. But Henry had learned to spot the little things. Her foot tapped nervously, heel bouncing against the rubber matting. Her knee jiggled as though her whole body was trying to work out the energy of a mind that was unraveling by the minute. When they reached her stop, she rose without a word, shoulders hunched so deeply it was like she was trying to fold herself completely into the hoodie. She shuffled down the narrow aisle, passing Henry with her usual silence. As she stepped off the bus, she hesitated just a second, just enough for Henry to see it. Her head turned the slightest bit, as if she was about to say something, but then it snapped back down, and she darted toward the front door of her house. The door closed behind her. No wave. No goodbye. Just the usual soft, hollow click of her disappearing inside that house that didn't feel like a home. Henry waited, engine humming softly. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel as the question gnawed at him. Was there something else under that seat? His feet moved before the thought could fully form. He stood, heart pounding, and walked back down the aisle, past the rows of seats that just an hour ago had been filled with oblivious chatter. When he reached the fourth row, he crouched down, his knees protesting with a dull ache. At first, he saw nothing, just a crumpled candy wrapper and a pen cap. But then his fingers brushed against something cold. Thin. Plastic. He reached under, fingers curling around the edge of it. When he pulled it out, his breath hitched. A phone. A small, cheap, prepaid disposable phone. The screen was cracked, a jagged fracture running diagonally from corner to corner. But it was still on, the faint blue glow weak but alive. Henry's thumb hovered over the screen. Only one app was open, the messaging app. A single text sat there, half-typed, unsent. His eyes scanned the words. He said if I tell anyone, he'll. And that was it. The message cut off mid-sentence, like whoever was typing either ran out of time or courage. Henry's throat tightened. His hands trembled as he scrolled. No contacts. No call history. No outgoing or incoming messages. Just that one unfinished plea, stranded like a broken signal in an ocean of silence. He sat back on his heels, staring at the phone as a cold sweat trickled down his spine. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just some forgotten, discarded phone. This was deliberate. This was hidden. Emma had left this here on purpose. And Henry was beginning to realize, whatever was happening to that girl, she was running out of ways to ask for help. Henry sat at his kitchen table long after the bus route had finished, the tin box open in front of him, the GPS tracker resting in the center like a cursed object. The disposable phone, now powered off to conserve the last sliver of battery it had, sat beside it. His dinner, a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, had gone cold without a single bite taken. His eyes were fixed on the small black device, watching the steady blink of its red light, each pulse feeling like a heartbeat that didn't belong. He turned it over in his hands for the 5th time, scanning every side. It was no larger than a deck of cards, slim and unmarked except for one thing: a serial number etched into the underside in tiny silver letters. Most people wouldn't notice it, but Henry's years of working with machinery and serial stamped equipment had trained his eye to catch small details. He reached for his laptop, fingers jittery but determined. He wasn't a tech genius by any stretch, but he knew his way around a search engine. He typed the string of numbers into the bar, first hoping for a simple explanation. Maybe a standard GPS company, maybe a lost pet tracker. But what came up wasn't simple. The first few results were generic. Pages selling GPS devices, listings for tracking services. Then, buried deeper on page 3, something caught his eye, a reference to a shipment manifest in an online distributor database. He clicked, heart pounding. It was a public data leak, a searchable spreadsheet of purchase orders from a third-party electronics wholesaler. He scanned the list. Line after line of orders from businesses, most legitimate. And then there it was. The serial number matched a batch of 10 GPS units ordered 6 months ago. His eyes shifted left to the buyer information. A company name, Orion Solutions. A harmless enough name. But something about it made the hair on Henry's neck stand up. He copied the name into a fresh search. The result was stranger than he expected. No company website. No phone number. No address except for a simple mailing location listed as 125 Brookdale Industrial Park, Suite 4. Brookdale. Local. Henry's brow furrowed. That industrial park was barely 5 minutes from his house. He'd driven past it 1,000 times. A row of rundown units, mechanics, storage spaces, a pawn shop, an old printing company that had closed years ago. He pulled the records open again. There was something else. The registered owner of Orion Solutions was listed simply as Victor Hale. Henry's stomach dropped. His mouth went dry. Victor. The same name as the man standing behind the door of Emma's house. The same man whose sharp, jittery eyes hadn't left him for a second when they spoke. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Henry leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen like it might somehow change if he blinked. This wasn't just some abusive guardian watching Emma's movements out of twisted paranoia. This was bigger. Someone had set up an entire shell company just to order equipment designed to track, monitor, and control. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, his mind spinning with questions. Was Emma the only one? Were there others? Was this man doing more than just tracking her? The thought made Henry's skin crawl. He glanced at the GPS tracker again, its little red light blinking, steady, constant. Proof that someone had gone to great lengths to keep tabs on a child. Proof that whoever Victor really was, he wasn't just a bad guardian. He was someone who planned, someone methodical, someone dangerous. Henry closed his laptop slowly, hands trembling but steadier than they'd been before. He didn't know exactly what he was stepping into, but one thing was certain now: this wasn't just Emma's fight anymore. It was his too. Henry wasn't sure why he drove toward Main Street that afternoon. Maybe part of him hoped to clear his head, to put a little distance between himself and the growing weight of everything he had uncovered. But another part, something deeper, more instinctual, told him to stay close, to keep eyes on the places Victor might frequent. His truck idled at the corner near Brookdale Pharmacy, the same small place where he'd stopped for aspirin or cough syrup countless times before. It was nothing special, just a squat brick building with fading white trim and a crooked neon sign that blinked open in sluggish pulses. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter when he spotted them. Victor and Emma. They were just stepping out of an old blue sedan parked haphazardly at the curb, Victor walking several paces ahead, his long legs quick, jittery. Emma followed behind like a shadow, her hoodie pulled up, her face tilted toward the ground. Her steps were slow, dragging, like it took everything in her just to move forward. But what made Henry's pulse spike was the way she was holding her arm, cradling it against her chest, her hand gripping the fabric of her sleeve like it was the only thing holding her together. It wasn't until the sunlight caught her wrist that Henry noticed it. A bruise. Dark, ugly. The kind of bruise that didn't happen from bumping into a desk or falling in gym class. His gut twisted into a hard knot. Victor shoved open the pharmacy door, letting it swing back so hard it nearly hit Emma in the face before she caught it with one sluggish hand. She flinched, not at the door, but instinctively, as though something had conditioned her to expect blows, even from inanimate things. Henry slid down slightly in his seat, watching through the windshield as they moved inside. He killed the engine, stepped out of the truck, and quietly crossed the street, pretending to check the front window of the bookstore next door while keeping his gaze angled toward the pharmacy. Through the glass, he could see Victor gesturing wildly at the counter, his mouth moving fast, hands slicing the air. The cashier, a young guy no older than 20, stood firm, shaking his head while occasionally glancing nervously toward the register. Whatever Victor wanted, the answer was no. Henry's focus shifted to Emma. She stood near the end cap of a magazine rack, away from the counter, shoulders drawn tight, eyes flickering toward Victor and then back to the shelf. There was a franticness in her body language, like her brain was screaming at her to do something, anything, while the window of opportunity was open. And then she did. Her hands moved quickly, almost imperceptibly. From the pocket of her hoodie, she slipped out a small piece of folded paper. Her eyes darted toward Victor, who was too busy arguing to notice. She pretended to flip through a magazine, then deftly tucked the paper deep between two issues of Good Housekeeping, her fingers lingering just a second too long as though making sure it was hidden. Henry's heart jumped. It was a signal. It had to be. A desperate message for someone, anyone, to find. Victor's voice spiked, loud enough for Henry to hear through the glass. "It's my damn right to buy what I want. You got no business asking questions. Run the sale or get me your manager." The cashier shook his head, voice strained but firm. "We can't sell that without a valid prescription. That's policy." Victor slammed his palm down on the counter. Emma flinched so sharply Henry saw her whole body shudder, shrinking further behind the magazine rack. Henry's fists clenched. His every instinct screamed to march in there, to pull Emma out by the hand and never look back. But he forced himself to stay still. If Victor caught sight of him now, whatever slim chance Emma had to pass that message unnoticed would vanish. Victor eventually gave up. With a final curse, he spun away from the counter, storming toward the door. Emma hurried after him, her eyes brushing briefly over the magazine rack one last time before disappearing out the door. Henry waited, watched as they climbed into the car, watched Victor smack the steering wheel before peeling away from the curb, tires squealing against the pavement. The moment they were gone, Henry strode quickly into the pharmacy. His eyes darted to the magazine rack. His hands trembled as he flipped through the rows. And then he saw it. A folded scrap of paper, wedged deep between two magazines, half buried but unmistakably placed. With a deep, steadying breath, Henry reached for it, feeling the weight of whatever was written inside before he even opened it. Henry's fingers shook as he slid the folded paper out from where it had been wedged between the glossy covers of the magazines. It was small, hurriedly folded, edges wrinkled and soft from being clenched in nervous hands. He stared at it for a moment, heart pounding in his chest so hard it almost drowned out the gentle hum of the pharmacy around him. The world outside this tiny square of paper seemed to disappear. The quiet beep of the register, the polite chatter between the cashier and an older customer picking up a prescription. None of it registered. None of it mattered. Slowly, carefully, as though unfolding it might detonate something, Henry opened the paper. The handwriting was the first thing that hit him, uneven, frantic, letters slanting downward as if the writer's hands were trembling too much to keep them straight. Smudges of either dirt or tears dotted the edges. And the words felt like a punch straight to his ribs. "He locks me in the basement at night. Please help me. Please." Henry's mouth went dry. His vision blurred for a split second, his pulse roaring in his ears. His fingers tightened around the note, not because he meant to, but because his hands refused to stop shaking. The air in his lungs seemed to freeze, trapped, as though the weight of the words was suffocating him. Basement. The word rattled around his skull like a marble in an empty jar. All at once, it painted a picture his mind hadn't wanted to draw. Emma, locked in some cold, dark space beneath that sagging house, the boarded-up windows, the shadowed hallways. A space that was meant to hide her, to keep her silent, to trap her. The bruises, the hollow look in her eyes, The way she flinched when Victor raised his voice. The GPS tracker. The unsent text on the broken phone. Every piece clicked together now, not as separate warnings, but as the outline of something far more sinister than Henry had first feared. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, forcing down the wave of nausea rising in his throat. This wasn't some vague cry for attention. This was a desperate SOS. A girl begging the universe, anyone, to notice, to care, to pull her out before it was too late. Henry opened his eyes again, refolding the note with shaky but deliberate care. His first instinct was to go straight to the police, storm in, slap the paper down on the counter, and demand someone take action. But his mind raced faster than his hands. Would they listen? Would they act fast enough? What if Victor noticed Emma's tracker hadn't moved? What if, right now, as Henry stood here holding her plea for help, Victor was on his way back to that house to punish her for daring to reach out? Henry's chest tightened at the thought. His hands trembled harder. He forced a breath through clenched teeth and slid the note into his jacket pocket, pressing it against his chest like he could somehow shield it, or the girl who wrote it, from the world. He left the pharmacy without making eye contact with anyone, moving quickly but not so quickly as to draw attention. His boots hit the sidewalk heavy, purposeful, as his mind screamed over and over. She's locked in the basement. At night. Every single night. Henry climbed into his truck, slamming the door shut, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. His reflection in the rearview mirror startled him, face pale, eyes wide, jaw clenched so tight it ached. His heart hammered against his ribs, not just with fear, but with fury. There was no more question of whether this was serious. No more wondering if he was overreacting. This was real. Emma was trapped. And Henry knew with absolute certainty now. He was the only person who had seen the signs, the only one who had listened. If he didn't do something, and fast, no one would. Not a soul. Henry sat in his truck, engine off, lights dimmed, parked just far enough down the street to avoid suspicion but close enough to keep the house in sight. The dashboard clock glowed faintly, 10:47 p.m. The street was quiet, wrapped in the heavy hush that only came when most of the world had gone to bed. A distant dog barked once, then fell silent. Somewhere a porch light flickered, then went dark. But Henry wasn't focused on any of that. His eyes were locked on the tired, sagging White House at the end of the block, Emma's prison. He had told himself he was just going to watch. That he wasn't going to do anything reckless. That if something suspicious happened, he would call the police. That's what a reasonable man would do. But the note burned in his pocket like a live coal. He locks me in the basement at night. Please help me. Please. He couldn't stop hearing those words over and over. Couldn't stop seeing the bruise on her arm, the way she flinched like she was shrinking into herself. He'd been parked there for nearly an hour before the first sign of movement stirred behind the grimy front window. A shadow passed once, then again. Moments later, the side door creaked open. Victor emerged, hunched slightly, wearing a dark jacket, jeans, and work boots, his lanky frame illuminated for a split second by the porch light before he clicked it off. Henry tensed, leaning forward, his breath shallow. Victor looked both ways down the street, head swiveling like a predator scanning the edge of a forest. For a moment, Henry thought the man's eyes locked directly on his truck. He held his breath. But Victor turned away, apparently satisfied no one was watching. Then Henry saw it. Victor dragging something out the side door, something long, bulky, and wrapped tight in a blue tarp. He grunted as he hauled it, struggling slightly under the weight. Whatever was inside wasn't small. Henry's stomach twisted. His pulse raced. Every terrifying possibility flooded his mind at once. Was it? No, it couldn't be. No, it had to be tools. Supplies. Junk. Anything but... Victor hefted the tarp-covered bundle onto his shoulder awkwardly, stumbling slightly as he made his way toward the backyard. He paused at the corner, fiddling with the latch on the gate, then shoved it open with his hip. Henry leaned over the console, craning to see past the overgrown bushes that obscured most of the backyard. The moon offered just enough light to catch Victor moving toward a squat wooden shed tucked at the far end of the yard. The same shed Henry had noticed on previous drives, something that had always looked half-collapsed, rotting from the bottom like a broken tooth. Victor dropped the tarp in front of the shed, unlocked the padlock hanging from the door, and yanked it open. The door sagged on its hinges, creaking as it swung wide. Then, glancing once over his shoulder, Victor dragged the bundle inside. Henry's heart slammed so hard he could feel it vibrating in his fingertips. His mouth went dry. He forced himself to breathe, to stay still, to watch. Victor disappeared into the shed for several minutes. Long enough that Henry started gripping the door handle, ready to bolt down the street if something, anything, sounded wrong. When Victor finally emerged, his hands were empty. He wiped them on his jeans, locked the shed again, and walked back toward the house. At the back steps, he paused, lit a cigarette, stared out into the dark street for a long time. Henry slid lower in his seat, praying Victor couldn't see him, but still keeping his eyes just high enough over the dashboard to track his movements. The man stood there, smoking, scanning the neighborhood like a wolf, making sure the rest of the forest was asleep. When the cigarette burned down, Victor flicked it into the grass, turned, and went inside, the door shutting with a hollow thud. Henry's hands shook as he reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over the keypad. His instinct screamed now. Whatever was in that shed, whatever was under that tarp, it was something he wasn't supposed to see. And if Emma was locked in the basement at night, what was Victor hiding out here? Henry didn't know yet. But he knew one thing with terrifying certainty. He wasn't leaving until he found out. Henry's hands trembled as he fumbled with his phone, struggling to tap in the numbers. His thumb hovered over the screen for a split second longer than it should have, as though some last shred of doubt was trying to root him in place. But there was no more doubt. Not anymore. Not after the note, not after the bruises, not after watching Victor haul that tarp-wrapped burden into the shed like he was storing something, or someone, he never wanted found. His thumb jabbed the dial. 3 numbers. The only 3 that mattered now. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was crisp, steady, professional. Henry's breath came fast, shaky. My name's Henry Collins. His voice cracked. He had to start again. I'm calling about a child in danger. A girl. Emma Rodriguez. She rides my bus. She's being held against her will. I have proof. There was a brief pause, then the dispatcher's tone sharpened. Sir, are you with the child now? No, I'm parked outside the house. I've been watching. I've got evidence. Notes from her. Photos. A GPS tracker. An unsent text message. She's locked in the basement at night. I just saw her guardian dragging something into a backyard shed. Something heavy. This is bad. Really bad. The dispatcher's fingers were no doubt flying across their keyboard. What's the address, sir? Henry rattled it off, barely able to keep his voice steady. Okay, Mr. Collins. Stay on the line. I'm escalating this right now. Officers are being dispatched as we speak. Stay where you are. Do not approach the residence. Understood. His voice barely sounded like his own. A tense silence followed, punctuated only by the dispatcher's occasional updates. Units are en route. ETA 3 minutes. Henry stared at the house, adrenaline turning every second into something elastic and unbearable. The porch light flicked on again. Shadows shifted behind the boarded-up windows. Somewhere inside, Victor moved, unaware that his carefully constructed world was seconds away from unraveling. Then, sirens. Low at first, then rising, flashing red and blue slicing through the night. 2 patrol cars swung onto the street, tires screeching. Another SUV pulled up from the opposite end, boxing the house in. Officers poured out, hands resting on holstered weapons, flashlights cutting through the dark. Police! Open the door! One shouted, pounding his fist against the frame. No answer. Open the door now! A crash, wood splintering as the battering ram struck. Once. Twice. The door gave way on the third. Officers flooded inside, shouting commands. Henry gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went bone white. His heart hammered like it was trying to break out of his chest. Then shouting from inside. Chaotic. Gobbled. A scream. Victor's. Sharp. Panicked. A heavy thud. More shouting. Seconds dragged like hours until one officer burst out the front door, running toward the patrol car to grab bolt cutters. Another officer disappeared around the back toward the shed. And then, a sound Henry would never forget, splintering wood and the unmistakable creak of a heavy door being forced open. "Clear the basement," someone shouted. A beat of silence. Then, a voice, tight, shocked. "Jesus Christ. We found her. Get EMS now." Henry's breath caught. His grip on the wheel slackened as tears stung his eyes. Relief mixed with horror. He strained to see. More officers rushed down into the basement, their radios crackling. Then one emerged carrying someone small, wrapped in a gray blanket, clinging desperately to his chest. It was Emma. Pale, weak, alive. But it wasn't just Emma. Moments later, another officer emerged, his face ashen. He spoke hurriedly into his radio, voice strained. "We've got multiple victims. Looks like Jesus. Looks like she wasn't the only one." Henry's blood ran cold. His hands trembled as realization sank in. Victor's twisted world was worse than anything he could have imagined. And this was only the beginning. The flashing lights eventually dimmed, but the echoes of that night never really faded. Even after the patrol cars cleared, after Victor was hauled away in handcuffs, his face twisted in rage, screaming incoherent threats, the image of Emma being carried out of that basement lingered in Henry's mind. Her small frame bundled in a gray emergency blanket, eyes hollow but flickering with something that hadn't been there before, hope. Fragile, barely breathing, but there. Henry stood near the edge of the driveway, watching as paramedics gently loaded Emma into the back of the ambulance. Her face was pale, drawn, but her fingers reached out when she spotted him. A trembling hand stretched past the paramedic's shoulder, not toward her house, not toward any of the officers, but toward him. Henry stepped forward, his voice cracking when he spoke. "It's okay, Emma. You're safe now. You hear me? You're safe." Her fingers brushed against his, cold and weak but still gripping, still there. Her lips trembled, forming words that barely made a sound. "You came." "I did," he whispered. "I did." 4 hours afterward, Henry sat in a stiff plastic chair in the emergency room waiting area. His fingers drummed against his jeans, eyes fixed on the floor, trying to hold back the storm of emotions pressing against his ribs. Officers came by in waves, asking questions, gathering statements. He handed over everything, the tin box, the GPS tracker, the broken phone, the note from the pharmacy. Every scrap of evidence, every desperate clue Emma had left for someone, anyone, to find. And now, someone had. It wasn't long before the layers of Victor's lies began peeling away. The detectives uncovered a nightmare that stretched further than Henry could have imagined. Emma's parents weren't dead. At least not in the way Victor had told everyone. Her mother was alive, but she had been reported missing nearly 8 months ago, the case left cold after Victor claimed she had run off. Her biological father had been out of the picture since Emma was a toddler, his parental rights terminated years prior. Somehow, through a complicated mess of forged documents, falsified guardianship paperwork, and an alarming lack of oversight from child services, Victor had taken control of Emma's life without anyone asking too many questions. The basement where she'd been kept wasn't just a punishment room, it had been her world. 4 concrete walls, a single mattress, and a padlocked door. They found journals she'd kept, desperate, terrified entries scrawled on the backs of receipts, old pieces of junk mail, whatever scraps she could find. Stories of nights without food, of being locked away for hours, sometimes days, while Victor went about his life as though she didn't exist. And that shed, the one Henry had seen Victor hauling the tarp into, held even darker secrets. Evidence of other crimes, other victims, photos, items that didn't belong to Victor, items that didn't belong to Emma. It was bigger than anyone could have imagined. But Emma survived. She was placed into protective custody immediately. Child welfare agents, who now scrambled to cover the gaping holes their department had left open, found her a temporary foster home with a family trained for trauma cases. But through it all, one thing never changed. Henry stayed. He visited the hospital every day, sat with her while doctors treated her for malnutrition, for dehydration, for bruises in various stages of healing. sat quietly when her words failed her, held her hand when the memories became too loud. She asked him once, her voice small and cracked, "Why did you keep looking?" Henry squeezed her fingers gently, his voice thick. "Because someone had to." The court process was slow but deliberate. Charges stacked higher than Henry could count. Kidnapping, child abuse, false imprisonment, fraud. More than a dozen in total. Victor never saw daylight again. His sentencing made headlines across the county, reporters dubbing him the basement monster of Brookdale. But for Henry, the headlines didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the girl sitting across from him in that small hospital room, slowly learning to breathe again, to speak again, to believe, maybe for the first time, that not everyone would hurt her. Weeks passed. The bruises faded. Her eyes, once filled with shadows, started to hold something softer. Not fully healed. Not yet. But alive. Free. Henry often thought about how close it had been. How easy it would have been to dismiss the quiet girl in seat 4. How easy it would have been to mind his own business. A tin box. A blinking light. A folded note stuffed between magazines. Small things. But sometimes, it's the smallest things that save someone's life.